Incredible story of one man's escape from Devil's Island, Papillon. First on BBC One, the 9 o'clock news and campaign report with Michael Buerk.
Terrorists cut Britain in half today. A bomb and several security alerts blocked the main rail and road links to the north. John Majors said Tony Blair would fly the white flag of surrender in Europe. Labour says it shows how desperate the Tories are. And the contaminated blood that infected 3 people with the AIDS virus. Good evening. The election campaign and the plans of thousands of travellers were disrupted by terrorists again today. A bomb and several security alerts after telephone warnings cut the 2 main north-south rail lines and the M6 motorway. Nobody was hurt. The politicians blamed the IRA. The bomb outside Leeds railway station went off just before 9 this morning. Police evacuated buildings within half a mile. Stations at Doncaster, Crewe and Stoke-on-Trent were shut after phone warnings, and more calls led to the M6 being closed in 3 counties. It's now been reopened. North of England correspondent John Thorne reports.
The bomb destroyed a line of relay junction boxes just outside Leeds City Station. Tonight, forensic teams are assessing the damage and calculating the explosive force. When the device went off, police were still clearing the station and surrounding streets.
You take cover now!
As the exclusion zone was widened, most people left in an orderly manner, while others ran, fearing another device. A commuter train was passing as the bomb exploded.
There was a silver box at the side of the track. I don't know if it holds electrical equipment. And as our train carriage went past it, it just blew up. Big bang, and like everyone's like screaming, hold the heads.
The bomb squad spent much of the day checking out suspect packages. The commercial and shopping heart of Leeds had been completely shut down. 40 miles southeast, another alert closed the rail main line at Doncaster. For the second time, the station was the target of a coded terrorist warning.
I mean, do the IRA know what they're doing to us? You know, it's not just a railway station, it's our lives, it's our homes. And it's scary to think that you're not even safe anymore in your home.
Passengers for Newark and London, transfer your luggage here, please.
In a repeat of the previous strategy, both main north-south rail links were paralysed. The station complex at Crewe was shut down. The M6 was closed for much of the day at sections in Lancashire and Staffordshire. There were telephoned warnings for all the incidents. But this time, in Leeds, there was no recognised code word in the call about the real bomb.
If they have any guts, these people, and if it is shown to be a terrorist incident, then why don't they take on the forces of military rather than innocent people? And therefore, I think it is, in my mind, extreme acts of cowardice that they are showing.
The pattern of incidents brought chaos across the north. For a city like Leeds, a financial centre claiming to be second only to London, the disruption to business will be costly. This afternoon, after thorough searches, the M6 motorway was reopened. And tonight, all the railway stations were back in action. Many passengers had taken the advice to abandon their travel until tomorrow. But the patient commuter could make the delayed journey home.
This is the 3rd time in 3 weeks that terrorism has sabotaged communications, commerce or sport in the north. But the emergency reaction planners have learned from the experience, and normality has been restored ever quicker. John Thorne, BBC News, Leeds.
The party leaders broke off from campaigning to condemn the terrorists. John Major said everything pointed to the attack being the work of the IRA. And while Sinn Féin fought the election in Northern Ireland, its terrorist flip side continued to attack mainland Britain.
Not in Northern Ireland, because they want votes for Sinn Féin. So they will put their bombs and their violence and their planning and their nastiness and their sheer vileness here on the mainland of Britain during the course of this a general election campaign.
This Labour Party and this Labour leader abhor terrorism. We will not give in to it, and the IRA must understand very, very carefully indeed. The democratic path is there to be taken. They either take it or they will be cast out of this process forever.
Fools can always cause disruption, but this will have no effect The only thing it will do will make people more angry and make people more implacable, to be absolutely certain that whatever happens, the IRA are not able to bomb their way to a solution or to disturb the process of democracy.
Well, in our Belfast newsroom now is the BBC's Ireland correspondent, Denis Murray. Denis, it's unusual for the IRA to launch a terrorist campaign in an election campaign. What effect is it likely to have on Sinn Féin in the polls?
Well, I don't think it's likely to have much effect on Sinn Féin's vote in Northern Ireland. That'll be decided by other factors. I mean, Sinn Féin have used this kind of tactic here for years, attacking the Belfast-Dublin railway line, disrupting traffic in Belfast with bomb scares on the bridges over the River Lagan that runs through the middle of it. I think then and now what they're trying to do is disrupt normal life, but what they're also doing is sending a message to the British politicians, to whoever forms the new government, that if you want this kind of thing to stop, bomb alerts and real bombs, then ultimately Republicans will have to be talked to.
But as it's happening in the other part of Great Britain, is it not having much of an effect on the prospective voters in Northern Ireland?
I shouldn't think it would, particularly if people are not being killed. I think there's a new atmosphere since the IRA ceasefire that I think people in Northern Ireland might well be appalled by some kind of what would be a real atrocity in Britain. But I mean, in the mid-1980s here, an IRA bomb killed 2 Catholics on the Falls Road, and a couple of days later there was a by-election for a district council seat, and Sinn Féin's vote went up.
Is there any sense in Northern Ireland that a change of government in London would actually give fresh momentum to the peace process?
It might do. I mean, some minor Sinn Féin people have been sort of hinting that a new political landscape would provide a new political opportunity. But I mean, who could have been harder than Tony Blair was today? And his shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, Mo Mowlam, has put down several markers that Sinn Féin needn't expect lighter treatment from Labour than they have done from the British government. I mean, it's possible that there might be a new political landscape, but I think one counter effect of what the IRA has been doing is to unite all the parties, not just against terrorism, but to agree on one thing without doubt, which is Sinn Féin will not get into talks without a new and credible IRA ceasefire.
But is this campaign, do you think, is it being done with half an eye on a change of government in London?
I think that's without question. I think what the IRA are trying to do is get major international headlines. That was what Aintree was about. It uses minimum personnel, it uses minimum material, and so far it has not caused loss of life. What they're trying to do is remind the British people and whoever forms the next British government that ultimately, if you want this to stop in your country, you're going to have to deal with Republicans. It's not just for propaganda, it's a very hard political point.
Denis Murray, thanks very much indeed. The Prime Minister used a speech to party supporters tonight to launch a new attack on Labour over Europe, saying if Labour won the election, Tony Blair would surrender British powers at the Amsterdam summit in June. He said Tony Blair would be like a fly at a spider's convention. Labour said the increasingly crude and desperate language now being used by Mr Major would rebound on him. Earlier, the parties had clashed over a Tory advertisement showing a small Mr Blair sitting on the knee of a large Chancellor Kohl. Our political editor Robin Oakley reports.
Risking more accusations of fighting a purely negative campaign, the Prime Minister was sharply personal again tonight about Tony Blair. He insists that it will need his own negotiating experience at the Amsterdam summit in 6 weeks' time to stop the slide to a more federal Europe.
I don't believe you can trust Labour on Europe. If Mr Blair went to Amsterdam, then at a stroke of his pen, our competitiveness, our sovereignty, our jobs would begin to flow away.
Mr Major argues that the Labour leader's readiness to drop Britain's veto on regional, industrial and environmental issues and his declared intention of signing up to the social chapter have left him nothing to negotiate with.
I know those Europeans, they'd eat him alive. It'd be like sending a fly to a spider's convention.
Earlier today at his news conference, Mr Major sought to justify the Tories' use of newspaper advertisements, depicting Tony Blair as a puppet on German Chancellor Helmut Kohl's knee.
He's thrown away the negotiating cards he had and surrendered his position. The advertisement this morning makes that point very vividly, and it's something the British nation need to understand.
Can I? Brian.
His deputy couldn't wait to join the argument.
This guy would never let Britain down like that.
Like an elder brother determined to protect a plucky sibling from the playground bullies, the Deputy Prime Minister kept chipping in.
And it needs to be noted.
And what you people have completely got wrong is that you think that somehow or other the Europeans think that this country...
What did you have for breakfast?
I tell you.
In fact, the poster itself had grown from a Heseltine doodle, taken up and embellished by the Tories' advertising gurus. Labour, who say the Tories aren't pushing Europe to the fore at all, but merely indulging in personal abuse, condemned the poster as puerile and pathetic.
It's indeed a measure of how the Conservative campaign has degenerated. What was seen to be on Wednesday as an attempt at statesmanship became yesterday confusion and disarray, and has now become personalised smears, revealing the panic and indeed the desperation in the Conservative camp.
The Shadow Chancellor, too, championed his man.
If leadership is indeed the issue, Tony Blair has shown by his magnificent reform of the Labour Party that whenever he is tested, he can both lead and get results. If the issue is one of leadership, then Tony Blair has shown that he can lead. John Major simply follows.
In the West Country again, Liberal Democrat leader Paddy Ashdown was equally dismissive of Mr Major's tactics.
This style of campaigning will do him no good, will do politics no good, and demeans the whole process of the election. The sooner the Conservatives get off this, the better. I think that's probably... Yes, okay, right.
What specifically is it that you object to in the advertisement?
I just think it's the personalisation of an attack on Mr Blair, which is, in my view, unfair. It is also unsustainable. It is also extremely insulting, and I think it turns the public off in droves.
Concentrating on Europe threatens regular dollops of embarrassment for the divided Tories. And Lady Thatcher, on the campaign trail today, duly provided the latest. Asked if she favoured the single currency on which Mr Major wants his options kept open, she declared, good heavens, no. Another embarrassment came with the revelation by millionaire Paul Sykes, who's contributing to the election expenses of Tories willing to oppose a single currency, that 227 had now signed up to take his money.
This isn't no little rump of the party, it is the vast majority. There's only about 30 left that are not willing to rule out a single currency now.
The Prime Minister, trying to keep the number 10 address, as well as the number 10 shirt with which he was presented at Bolton Wanderers' new ground today, is unrepentant about tackling both man and ball in his efforts to do so. Despite his party's disarray on Europe, he's keeping his hopes alive.
Mr Major, Bolton will be in the Premiership next year, will you?
Yes. Yeah. Once again, the Tories' methods, as well as their message, have become a focus of the election campaign. They say it's attacking, not negative politics, and that they're fully entitled to question Mr Blair's fitness to lead Britain into an historic summit. Labour say Mr Major's record on the beef and fish battles in Europe is hardly a recommendation to trust him, and they're quite content for this to be an election about leadership. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Westminster.
Chancellor Kohl's office has made no response to the Conservative campaign poster. A spokesman said the German government wouldn't be commenting on an election in another country. Whoever wins that election will, within weeks, be representing Britain at the Amsterdam summit. Our Europe correspondent James Robbins reports.
At a regional conference of Chancellor Kohl's Christian Democrat Party today, one of the German leader's closest allies made no attempt to hide his dismay at the Tory advertisement.
I feel sad. I feel very sorry, because I understand that there's an underlying message of mistrust against partners in Europe. And I think that's not the right way how we want to proceed in Europe, to bring our people together and get more understanding between our people.
The Christian Democrats see echoes of last year's anti-German British press during the Euro 96 soccer championships, although officially the German government refuses to get drawn into Britain's election campaign. The essence of the Tory attack is that John Major's skill and experience in Europe won big concessions for Britain at Maastricht, opt-outs from the social chapter and the single currency. They say Tony Blair would be too inexperienced to outwit and outbox Europe's big players. Mr Blair and Chancellor Kohl have already met, and the Labour leader has been shadowing the latest negotiations for months, including regular contact with the Dutch Prime Minister Wim Kok, who will chair the crunch bargaining at the Amsterdam summit only 7 weeks after polling day. The 15 leaders must settle the question, how much more power will they share before the European Union doubles in size and leaders from Eastern Europe join the club? Most governments insist national veto powers must be restricted, or else deadlock will become the norm. So at Amsterdam, Britain will be under pressure to accept extensions of qualified majority voting, which limits the power of individual countries to veto decisions. The Conservatives say they're opposed to any extension. Labour say they accept limited extension in a few areas, including the environment and spending on scientific research. There's no doubt governments in the rest of Europe do want a fresh start with Britain after the election, whoever wins. The beef war last year and Britain's blocking of all decisions badly damaged relations. Tom Spencer, leader of the Tories in the European Parliament, hated that policy, and he had doubts about today's advertisement, which he says now is the right side of xenophobia.
Having seen the ad and looked at it in detail, actually I'm more relaxed. The presentation of Chancellor Kohl is perfectly friendly. The body copy is careful, describes this as the challenge of negotiating with the immensely experienced leaders of the rest of Europe. And actually I think it's making a fair point.
Europe's leaders, who last met John Major in December, are eager to know who will be Prime Minister next time. They don't expect life with Britain ever to be easy, and they see little difference between the two big parties on the overwhelming issue for the future, the single currency. James Robbins, BBC News.
That's the news from the campaign trail for the moment. There'll be more later in the programme. But now the rest of the day's news. 3 people have been infected with the virus that leads to AIDS after receiving blood from a donor who was HIV positive. The national political and economic future. But first over to Anne Perkins at our Westminster campaign desk for her nightly election roundup.
Evening, Michael. Labour voters in seats where Liberal Democrats lie second to Conservatives can expect a mail shot in the next 10 days, pointing out that if they want to unseat the Tory, their best bet is to vote Lib Dem. This from the party which officially disapproves of tactical voting. Paddy Ashdown touring an optical equipment factory in the West Country, an area rich in Lib Dem target seats, where Labour support's vital if they're to unseat the Tories.
Since you've got a blue suit on and a yellow mask, which way are you going to vote?
Well, I think in Thornton it's going to be tactical. Yeah. And that's all I'm going to say.
Paddy Ashdown would like every voter to be orange, a committed Liberal Democrat. And he says there's evidence that they are genuinely winning over Labour support. But he also acknowledges to get the Tories out, there'll have to be tactical voting.
Tactical voting exists. I recognise that. I don't recommend it, but it exists. And I understand and respect the fact that many people will want, because they think it's right for them, to cast their vote tactically. Just as there will be many, many millions of others who will want to cast their vote for things that they believe in or things they want for their family, like more investment in education, putting a penny on income tax, solving the crisis in our hospitals.
The traditional Liberal Democrat message is that to win the moral argument for electoral reform and a fair system of voting, there must be as many Lib Dem votes as possible.
We want the largest possible national vote behind the Liberal Democrat members of Parliament who will serve in the next Parliament. That is actually pretty important to us, because it's part of the moral authority with which we'll campaign for a change in the electoral system.
But some Lib Dems say there won't be reform with a Tory government and are ready to endorse their Labour candidate to get change.
Really, it's more important to support anyone who opposes the government than to stick to impossible ideals of one's own.
And whatever party leaders say, they have the same aim as their party workers. In a highly unusual move, a dissolution honours list will be published at midnight tonight. Normally, it's not out until after polling day. It's expected the list will include a number of former Conservative ministers, as well as some senior members of Labour and the Liberal Democrats. A further list is expected after the election. Labour and the Liberal Democrats have set out their plans to tackle crime. The Liberal Democrats outlined their proposals to cut juvenile crime, and Labour said it would shake up what it called the over-centralised Crown Prosecution Service in England and Wales.
It is time for swift action to reform the Crown Prosecution Service, to ensure that it works more effectively with the police, takes greater account of the impact of its decision on victims, and brings more offenders to justice.
Conservatives' 18 years have seen the creation of a generation of criminals, and Labour's macho posturing will do nothing to change that. Liberal Democrats believe that prevention is better than cure. We want to develop constructive citizens, not create common criminals.
Labour is pointedly shrugging off today's Conservative newspaper advertisement depicting Tony Blair as a ventriloquist dummy on Helmut Kohl's knee. Party strategists suspect the Tories of wanting them to react, which would have got more news coverage of the advertisement. That's what happened over the Demon Eyes campaign, and it's the main point of using such controversial images, which the Prime Minister himself has vetoed in the past.
Tony Blair's just a boy wanting to do a man's job who'd end up as the puppet of Germany. That's what the Tories hope this ad will make you believe. The idea for today's advertisement started, the Tories say, with a scribbled drawing by Michael Heseltine, but we've unearthed an American magazine cover, remarkably like it, showing Hubert Humphrey sat on the knee of LBJ. And the dummy's not a new image in Britain either. In the 1980s, the Liberal leader David Steel never quite overcame this portrayal of his relationship with David Owen.
Oh, David, so cruel and yet so classically good-looking.
Nobody can doubt that the spitting image didn't exactly help David Steel, and of course the image is powerful. But to suggest that Tony Blair has that relationship to Helmut Kohl is absolutely ludicrous.
Many say this Tory ad was ludicrous too, but the anger it generated was, the party believes, the key to its success, and like today's, it only appeared in one day's papers. But advertisers say that just because the Tories' ads are talked about doesn't mean they move votes.
The stuff that they've done for the previous elections, like Labour's tax bombshell and the double whammy, is great because it's negative and it gave you a positive place to go afterwards. It was believable, credible, impactful and memorable. And this doesn't have that. This has the negative as the demonised thing. It's just name-calling in the playground. You don't have the answer. Once you've knocked down Tony Blair, you don't have an answer to Tony Blair.
Labour have also indulged in personal knocking copy. Both sides know that in the electoral race, it's often easier to trip up your opponent than to win on your own merits alone. Many people say they don't like negative advertising, so it can't possibly work. But knocking copy is a little bit like mouthwash. You may not like it, but millions of people use it. Nick Robinson, BBC News.
Lady Thatcher is continuing her progress around the country, campaigning in seats being fought by her Eurosceptic friends. Today she was in Essex, the county in which her electoral triumphs were rooted and where she's still big box office, even when she's just going shopping. Lady Thatcher's too busy campaigning to cook, so it's quiche for Sir Denis tonight.
When you're out electioneering, you live on something and salad.
Well, how about roast beef and salad?
Well, we've come to the roast beef, but this is quicker. You've got
It is
roast.
quicker.
This is Lady Thatcher in her new role as retired Prime Minister and national granny. Though, of course, she's far too professional a campaigner to miss an opportunity to promote the message.
English roast beef.
We only sell British beef.
Like red rum returning to Aintree, scene of former glories, an election campaign puts a spring in Lady Thatcher's step. If the media want to watch her shopping, she'll shop. And when it comes to paying, she doesn't sign her cheque, she autographs it.
Oh, no. My name is Margaret Thatcher.
But then, a problem with the currency. There is no cheque guarantee card in the celebrated handbag.
Listen, I don't want to have to go and put all these things back, so you better find a way of accepting my cheque.
She paid, of course, in pounds. Later, in an echo of many a sacked cabinet minister, a spokesman for Tesco said it would all have been all right if only she'd been prepared to wait. Normally, it's Michael Heseltine, it's Michael Heseltine who uses the breakfast, lunch and dinner line. Today, the tables were turned after his serial interventions at the press conference. John Major asked him what he had had for breakfast. And in case you were left worrying, we asked him.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Tony Blair.
Back to you, Mike.
Glad you cleared that up. And now for the latest of our reports on the election campaign around Britain, this time from Wales. As we found elsewhere, the economy, health and education are the key issues for the voters. Wales is the poorest area of Great Britain, with the lowest gross domestic product per head. That's in spite of record inward investment, 3 times the UK average, particularly from Japan. Education standards are improving. Last year, 42% of pupils passed 5 or more GCSEs at grades A to C, but that's still worse than in England. But it's the issue of the constitution, where the parties have very different policies. Labour wants to set up a Welsh Assembly, but will hold a referendum first. It would not have the power to raise or lower taxes, unlike its proposed Scottish counterpart. The Liberal Democrats want a Welsh Parliament with tax-varying powers, as part of a federal United Kingdom. The Conservatives say there'll be no constitutional change, but have proposed more powers for the Welsh Grand Committee, a body made up of all the MPs representing Welsh seats. And the Nationalists, Plaid Cymru, want a two-chamber parliament as the first step to self-government, which would have tax-varying and legislative powers. Wales political editor Glyn Mathias is in Cardiff.
Mike, I'm standing outside the City Hall in Cardiff, which would be the home of the Welsh Assembly the Labour Party is planning to set up if it's elected. That's the constitutional change which has been at the heart of many of the arguments during this election campaign here in Wales. Labour see it as a way of making government more democratically accountable to the people, but they face attacks on two different fronts. The Nationalists say it would be a powerless talking shop, while the Tories say that another tier of government would frighten off inward investors. Whether that's true or not, it is bread and butter issues like jobs which, as elsewhere, are uppermost in voters' minds. It's true that many thousands of new jobs have been created in the last few years, but it's also the case that Wales has some of the most deprived communities in Europe. Driving into Wales across the second Severn crossing, it's clear the completion of the bridge last year has given a significant boost to Wales's transport links. The M4 corridor and the high-tech industry it brings now extends well into South Wales. Just a few miles from the Severn crossing, work is underway on the biggest inward investment project that Europe has ever seen. The Korean electronics giant LG is creating a £1.7 billion development here, which will eventually employ more than 6,000 people. It's the most eye-catching of a series of inward investments which has put Wales back on the manufacturing map. The Japanese firm Panasonic arrived 20 years ago. This television manufacturing plant in Cardiff is its largest in Europe. Panasonic deny they're here because wages are low. They say they have nothing to fear from the introduction of a minimum wage if Labour wins.
We are competitive both in this area and outside the area, particularly in our electronics market. If you compare us with the major players in South Wales, Ford Motor Company, Sony, we are competitive. And we will continue to be competitive. So I would certainly not accept that Panasonic or South Wales is a low-wage economy.
It is nevertheless the case that average incomes in Wales are the lowest in Britain, mainly because of poorly paid jobs in the service sector. Unemployment is coming down, it's just above the UK average, but the prospects of finding a job can still be bleak.
If you take Wales overall, it's actually proving extremely successful at the moment. The big problem is that we're seeing success and therefore perhaps even a possible overheating in certain areas of Wales, for example in the southeast and to some extent in the northeast. It's always more difficult to make sure that that success manages to find its way further down the M4 corridor to the far west and also into the valleys area in South Wales.
As you leave the M4 and drive into the South Wales valleys, you find communities still trying to recover from the disappearance of traditional industries. Tower Colliery at Hirwaun is the last deep mine in Wales. There used to be well-paid jobs for all. Now it's very different.
The closing of the pits and generally a lack of industry around the area, then the valleys are suffering.
My son isn't working at the moment. He had a good education but can't find anything. Yes, my husband's working, but he's got to travel just about an hour every day.
Got a job, have you?
I got a job, yeah.
Yes. And all your friends...
paid as usual.
It's no paid job, is it?
Lowish.
Yeah. Why is that? Is it because you haven't got any alternative?
There's nothing else from you.
Some smaller manufacturing firms have been attracted to the valleys. This firm came from Somerset to Mountain Ash to set up in this brand new plant. It makes disposable medical devices, a labour-intensive operation attracted by the workforce available. Here wages, while still competitive, are lower.
Yeah, it's just a basic pay it is like for the valleys, but it's just same everywhere, so I've had the same pay all the time, really.
And how much is that?
It's just taking home about 110 basic.
You paid well here?
Not too bad. Not too bad, not too good.
Wales has done well in attracting new industrial investment, but whole communities in the valleys were stranded by the earlier industrial decline, suffering some of the worst social deprivation in Europe. The new jobs, while welcome, have yet to make up for the past. Driving beyond the M4, few of the benefits in jobs and prosperity stretch as far as Milford Haven in West Wales. This is an unemployment black spot, 20% out of work in parts, a problem compounded by the closure of another oil refinery. There used to be 5 oil companies based on the Haven. There'll be just 2 left when the Gulf refinery shuts down in midsummer. It means hundreds of job losses, fewer oil tankers using the Haven each month, and a huge hole in the local economy.
Well, besides, of course, 350 people being unemployed, we'll be taking something of the order of £15 million out of the local economy, both in their salaries, in rates, in local services, reduction in pilotage, probably, those kind of issues, right down to the local milkman will no longer be delivering the 100 pints of milk to this site.
The Welsh Development Agency has now been set the task of spreading new industry and jobs more evenly around Wales, to avoid what could otherwise become an economic divide in Wales between East and West. So how will these economic differences across Wales affect the way people here vote? Traditionally, Labour have dominated. In 1992, they took almost half the votes and 2/3 of the seats. Boundary changes since the last election have given Wales another 2 constituencies, a total of 40 this time. Of these, Labour holds 27. The Conservatives are calculated to be defending 8, including 2 new seats. Plaid Cymru have 4, and the Liberal Democrats just 1. One of the closest contests is in Ynys Môn, the island of Anglesey. It was narrowly won by Plaid Cymru last time, but has been held by all 4 main parties at some stage this century. Our Wales correspondent Tim Hirsch reports.
The new high-speed catamaran service from Dublin pulls into the seaport of Holyhead. The link with the Irish Republic is an economic lifeline in a constituency where unemployment is well above the Welsh average. For the Plaid Cymru candidate, defending a majority of just over 1,000, the Irish connection is a reminder of the benefits of being a small country with its own government.
If Ireland can attract new industry, and they're so remote from the market, it should be perfectly possible to do so in Wales. Without our own government, we feel we're not going to get those policies.
The Nationalists first stormed the island of Anglesey 10 years ago. Its politics remain volatile, and the Tories see this seat as their #1 target in Wales. Their candidate was joined today by a cabinet minister to help attack Plaid Cymru's economic arguments.
As long as Wales is part of the United Kingdom, Wales has the full clout of the UK behind its interests. And we've seen tremendous advantages for Wales under Conservative policies in the United Kingdom.
Although the Conservatives came closest to unseating Plaid Cymru at the last election, this is by no means a 2-horse race. Labour is the underdog here, an unusual position for a party which dominates politics in most of Wales. But it was a Labour MP who represented this island for nearly 3 decades, until 1979. Anglesey has seen many young people leaving the island recently because of the economic stagnation. Labour's candidate tells first-time voters they need an MP from a mainstream British party to lobby effectively for jobs close to home.
All we're getting is a political wilderness down here. We've got no influence at all, and that's what we're saying on the doorstep. We need a Labour MP so that we can have influence in government.
The Liberal Democrats took their candidate to a local aluminium powder plant today. They lost their deposit here at the last election, in a seat once held by the daughter of the Liberal Prime Minister, David Lloyd George. In this closely fought contest, they're hoping to avoid a squeeze.
Realistically, the people see Anglesey could go any way. The contest obviously is between the 3 other parties at the moment, but Liberal Democrats have a role to play.
All the contenders in Ynys Môn, including the referendum party candidate, are at a public forum tonight. Most locals agree this complex contest is still wide open, and in a place where personalities can be as important as parties, old-fashioned meetings like this could determine the result.
Tim Hirsch reporting there, and altogether there are 5 candidates standing in the constituency. There are a handful of these 3- and 4-cornered fights in rural parts of Wales where the outcome is almost impossible to predict. But there are also a number of key marginals in Wales which the Conservatives are defending. And what the Tories could risk in the event of a Labour landslide across Britain is ending up with no seats at all in Wales.
Glyn, thanks. The main news again, a bomb and several security alerts have disrupted large parts of the country, but nobody was hurt. And in the election campaign, there have been more bitter exchanges over Europe. Where our political editor, Robin Oakley, is here again. At the end of another week in the campaign, in which John Major has homed in clearly on Europe. How risky a strategy is this, Robin?
It is a big risk. It's given him, perhaps with his impassioned appeal for support, the don't tie my hands appeal, support on his options open policy on the single currency, probably the biggest personal success we've yet seen in the campaign. But immediately it began to implode for the Tories, problems over the free vote for Tory MPs on a single currency, ministers saying the wrong things about a single currency in their election addresses. The die is cast now. Mr Major's made Europe a central issue in the election. The question is whether the amount of Tory disarray outweighs any advantage they can get by positioning themselves as the guarantors against a federal Europe.
And what about the opposition parties? How do they measure what progress, or lack of it indeed, they've made over the last week?
Labour will be pretty pleased. They're looking very comfortable, very professional, assured. They put the wobbles of the previous week behind them. They've managed to be as positive as they said they would. 2 key speeches on education and health from Tony Blair. Biggest bonus for them, I think, that he is beginning to really relax at the press conferences and really to show some passion in his speeches. Liberal Democrats, they're probably the most pleased bunch of all this week. They've made real progress in the polls. They tend to get reported better in an election campaign. They think their practical policies on health, education, with bills attached, promises with bills attached, getting through to the public, evidence of tactical voting, and Paddy Ashdown proving very effective on the stump, probably done him no harm at all to show the joy he has at becoming a grandfather this week.
Robin Oakley, thanks very much. And that's the news tonight. News nights on BBC 2 at 10:30. That's all from the 9 o'clock news. Good night.